Hello students, welcome to Unit 9, Day 1, Putting It All Together. And today you start a project that's going to be about what influences temperature. And you can see this is part 1 of 4. Again, I am Emma Reed. I am an 8th grade math teacher, and I'm going to walk you through how to start this project, where we're going to answer the question, is temperature a function of latitude? So let's take a minute and just focus on this word latitude and make sure that we all are on the same page about its meaning. So this is an image that represents what latitude is. These are all different latitudes and they're measured in degrees. So we can see the equator is 0 degrees, then 10 degrees north, 10 degrees south, and so on. So this is latitude, and we're going to think about whether latitude influences temperature. Specifically, we're asking ourselves, is temperature a function of latitude? Which is a much more specific question than just, are they related to each other? So this is our visual of latitude. One connection that I make to the word latitude is lateral, which means side to side. So if you've ever watched sports, especially football, and you've seen a running back, how they run away from getting tackled, they're moving laterally, they're moving side to side. So latitude is the measurement that goes horizontally across the earth. And that's really important for us to picture in our mind because we're thinking, will that influence temperature? And more specifically, is temperature a function of latitude? So let's move on to our intro/launch. Today, our intro/launch is just some really important information to keep in mind for the next 4 lessons. This lesson is part of a 4-part series that will give you the opportunity to put together several of the math skills you have learned this year. Each of the 4 lessons will build on each other, and you will be asked to use information you found in one lesson to answer questions in the next. So make sure to keep a copy of the work you do today so you can refer back to it later. So whatever form your teacher is using for you to work on this lesson, make sure that you have a record, either saved in your Google Drive or screenshotted. Whatever way makes sense to you, make sure you have it going forward because it'll make each day easier on you. If you want to reread these directions, since they're really important, please pause and do that. And if not, we'll move on to slide B, which is the second part of our introduction/launch, where we actually get to answer a very interesting question. So our question here is, what factors or variables can influence the outside temperature? So you're just going to get a list of as many different factors you can think of, and you're going to write a sentence for each factor describing how changing it could change the temperature. So for example, one factor is time of day. So often after sunrise, the temperature increases and reaches a peak in the early afternoon and then decreases. So your list should sound like that for different variables and factors you come up with. So pause, enter your thinking in the blue space, and once you've had time to fully explain your thinking, we'll move ahead to our Explore section. So in our Explore section, we are looking at 2 different students' thinking, and we are considering who we might agree with, and we're going to answer some questions on the next slides. So Andre and Lynn are wondering if temperature is a function of latitude. Andre says, I think it is, as long as we fix time when we are measuring the temperature. Lynn says, but what if you have 2 places with the same latitude? Look at this weather map for Washington State. Seattle and Spokane have the same latitude, but different temperatures right now. So that's our given information. You may want to go back to this slide. But we're going to move on and answer some questions on slide D. So we're basing our answers on slide D to what we read on slide C. And we're thinking, what do Andre and Lynn mean? And what questions do you still have for Andre and Lynn? So pause and think about this slide. And once you've put in your own words what you think Andre and Lynn mean and what questions you still have for them, let's move ahead to slide E. So on slide E, we're still thinking about Andre and Lynn's story, and we're imagining they're discussing whether it's possible to define latitude and temperature in a way that makes sense to talk about temperature as a function of latitude. And they are considering different options. So in order for us to really understand these options, let's think back to the definition of a function. So a function assigns exactly one output to each input. So the order that we're expressing our thinking matters. So they're talking about temperature as a function of latitude. So consider, in that phrasing, what is our input, what is our output? Because knowing that definition, that a function assigns exactly one output to each input, is extremely important for deciding the advantages and disadvantages to each of our 4 options that we're going to look at. So our first option is what are the advantages and disadvantages of finding the temperature right now in cities with different latitudes by talking about temperature as a function of latitude. So decide on the advantages and disadvantages here. And when you're ready, we'll move on to our next option. Our next option, and again, we're thinking, is it possible to define latitude and temperature in a way that makes sense to talk about temperature as a function of latitude? That's what we're considering with each option. So what about finding the daily high temperature at cities that have different latitudes? Pause and think. And then we'll move on to your next option. Same question. Option 3 is finding the average high temperature in a specific month. For example, September, at cities that have different latitudes. Pause and think. And we'll move on to slide H. Our final option, finding the average yearly temperature at cities that have different latitudes. Pause and think. And when you're ready, we'll move on to our summarize section. For our summary, record your response to the focus question, is temperature a function of latitude? Use this space on the right to record notes during the lesson summary. So take your time to summarize your thinking here, and remember to save this in a place that you can find it because you'll still need this thinking for the next 3 lessons for your project. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for joining me.